Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome yet again to this episode of Lunch Guide. I'm your regular host, Chef Andy, and as you can see, there has been some changes to the show, a little bit of an appetizer just for all of you at home. On this particular episode, I'm going to be coming to you live from the studios where I'm going to be showing you some 2 ways with balls. We're going to be making some ugali balls and some fish balls. But before we proceed, I'm going to begin by introducing the ingredients we'll be working with today, and we're going to take it off from there. So right from the front, I've got some garlic powder, I've got some mixed spices, some cumin powder, and some cayenne pepper. I'm also going to be using two regular organic eggs, 1 white onion, and about 3 red onions. I'm also going to be using about 2 whole cloves of garlic, a bit of some maize flour, some breadcrumbs. I'm also going to be using about a handful of chives. In the jar here, we've also got some poppadoms, which we'll also be using later. I'm also going to be using some tilapia fillet, or if you can actually use any fillet that you may find available to you. I'm also going to be using just a bit of lettuce to plate, and last but not least, some salt and pepper to taste. So please do take this chance to grab your pens and papers if you're going to be taking notes, and when we come back, we're going to dive right into it. See you after a short while. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you who are just tuning in, we've just been introducing the ingredients we're working with today. And just to remind you, we are going to be working on some ugali balls and some fish balls. These are particularly 2 very beautiful dishes you can actually improvise in your very own kitchens at home, and they're actually a very, very beautiful crowd pleaser per se. So we're going to start off very, very simply by heating up some water. Remember, we are going to be making our ugali, and that you'll actually require to do first and allow it to cool off so that you can actually proceed to do your balls with. So I'm going to start off by heating up some water. And while that proceeds, we're going to also jump into the next step, which is basically preparation of our fish balls. So I'm going to start with those first while we give our water some time to heat up. And for that, you will require about 500 grams of tilapia fillet. And you're basically just going to move that to your board. And using a very sharp knife, we're going to proceed to chop this very finely. So I always recommend start by cutting your fish into some long workable strips. And turn that sideways once and proceed to chop as finely as possible with a sharp knife. And you can actually be able to alternate this with a lot of other varieties of fish. You can actually also use shellfish or crab or even prawns, and it will actually do a very, very good job. So we're just going to proceed to chop our fish as fine as possible. Remember, you are going to be rolling this into some balls, so you really need to get a very, very good texture and consistency of your fish. So very, very handy that you actually take a bit of time to actually really cut your fish in the right proportions. And I'm now chopping this into very, very small cubes, almost julienne in size. And for some of those of you who may actually be wondering if you can actually use whole fish for this particular dish, I would say it's also not a bad option, but if you do have the chance to actually fillet your fish really well and make sure there is no bones in your mixture, it will actually work just the same for this recipe. So just to finish the fish off, chopping right to the very end. And once that is completed, proceed to add everything into a mixing bowl. Right, once that's done, always make sure to clean your hands while you work. Very important to make sure that you don't actually contaminate everything you're working with. So I normally prefer to just use a separate knife. And if you have a chopping board, it will actually just serve the purpose. If you just turn it right upside down, and it will actually save you time from rinsing and proceeding with your work. So next up, we're going to proceed to add everything else that we'll be incorporating into our fish. And I'm going to start off by pounding about 5 cloves of garlic. I'm also going to be adding a bit of salt to my mortar. And that should actually help you really get a very, very good grind of that garlic. So very simply, begin by pounding your garlic flat, and then use your pestle to work around the mortar, looking for a paste-like consistency. And now proceed to add that to your mixing bowl. And if you're actually looking for a bit of heat as well, it's always also a nice addition to add a bit of chili to your mixture at this stage, and that will actually give it a very good kick of heat. But also another reminder, if you are going to be serving that to kids, you may actually want to go easy with the chilies. So our garlic is in. We're now going to proceed to add our dry ingredients. So I'm going to start off with my cayenne pepper, my cumin powder, my mixed herbs, and last but not least, our garlic powder. And basically using a spoon, proceed to mix everything together. Making sure to work your bowl right around, making sure to also turn your bowl continuously while you mix to get a nice, even, consistent mix. Right, now once that's done, we're only going to add a few other things to that, which will be about 2 tablespoons of breadcrumbs. We're also going to chop into that a small handful of some fresh chives. You can also alternate that for some spring onions if you can't manage to find these available to you. And for those of you who may actually not know what chives are a very good variety of onions. They've got a very, very good light pungency as compared to red and white onions. And of course, most of all, they really bring that beautiful green color to a mixture. Just discard the stalks and proceed to add that to your bowl. Now proceed to mix everything together. Of course, always making sure to start with your spices, because that is actually what's going to really flavor your meat, or your fish rather. Right, so once you've got a nice, beautiful consistency and your spring onions or your chives are mixed in well, proceed to crack 1 whole egg into your mixture. I always like to have an extra egg just in case the first one doesn't do the trick. So I will recommend start by adding one in the beginning and then continue to work your way. And now add a bit more breadcrumbs to really get that nice, more of a mushy consistency. And of course the breadcrumbs will also allow you to be able to really give the mixture a bit of some texture as well. Remember the balls will actually be frying in some hot oil, so it will actually also give it a nice visual appearance. And now all we are going to do is we are going to allow this to sit for a little bit while we proceed to make our ugali. So it's always advisable to give your mixture anywhere between an hour to 2. That will actually allow you to get those flavors marinating in there really well. But last and final thing that most of us always forget to do is to actually season the mixture. So for that, I'm going to be using the aid of some regular sea salt and a small dash of some black peppercorns, crushed of course by the mill. Mix that once more. And you can actually now allow your mixture to sit for a little bit. And while that rests, we're going to proceed to doing our ugali. So you're going to grab your maize flour, of course. And we're going to proceed using a wooden spoon to add our flour and mix everything together. And of course, making sure to follow instructions as they are given to you from the packet of flour that you buy. Remember, a lot of people actually have a bit of a challenge getting the consistencies right. I always recommend, if you can actually read most of the instructions right at the back of your packaging, it should actually be able to narrow everything down to simple. Now we're just going to continue mixing our ugali through, making sure to watch out for any lumps whatsoever. And now just when you're about to get to the right consistency, we are going to proceed to turn our heat to very, very low. That should allow for a slow, nice finishing of cooking of that ugali. Alright, so you're basically not going to be cooking this as you'd regularly do for most ugalis. This is actually going to be a little wet. Remember, you actually need a bit of moisture in your mixture to be able to roll these balls out really well. And that is the reason why we are not going to be cooking it to the very end of its cooking process, of course. And probably just to share a bit of history with this dish, I actually did a bit of traveling, and this was a particular beautiful blend of a recipe that was done by a fellow chef all the way in Uganda. And this is actually one particular party trick he used to use every time he tried to improvise a dish and always wanted to incorporate something local or bring some authenticity to the dish. And this is particularly one all of you are going to love. Right, so ugali is just about the right consistency. If you can be able to see it, it should actually be able to fall from your spoon. Now all we are going to do is proceed to turn off the heat completely. And I'm going to proceed to turn those into some balls. I am going to mention that I'm going to be using an ice cream scoop for this. If you don't have one of these at home, you can actually just probably portion those out with a spoon and just use your rolling pin or you use your chopping board to actually get a nice beautiful consistency to that. But just to make your work easier, an ice cream scoop does come with a lot of different options, and this is one of the many that most of you may not have known. So I'm just going to get rid of that, and very, very quickly just grab a bowl of some cold water. And all you're going to do now is proceed to just work your ice cream scoop around there, making sure to really just get a nice coating of that beautiful moistness of the water. And now all you're going to do next is always remember to actually dip your scoop in a bit of water. This will actually allow you to really scoop out the balls very easily, and it will actually avoid them from sticking to your spoon. Another option, you can actually rub a bit of grease or oil around the scoop. It will actually be able to get your balls out very, very well. So we're just going to grab a plate here. and we will proceed to form our balls. Of course, always making sure to give it a firm press against the side of your pan to make sure that there is no air pockets. And all you're going to do is just scoop those onto a plate and proceed to do the same thing for the rest. So this, I've actually been cooking or using about a cupful of maize flour. So that should actually be able to give you at least 2 to 3 portions for your kids, and for adult portions, maybe about 1 or 2. Right, so proceed to do the same for the rest. And as you can be able to see from the cameras there, it actually does make your work a little easy when you use a bowl of water right next to you. You would actually use the same technique if you were scooping ice cream, and it always makes your work much, much easier. So I do recommend, if you don't have one of this already, it actually is a very good addition to your artillery in your kitchenware. So we're going to add just one more to that. Let's give that a bit of a shake. It might actually get a little sticky towards the end, but a nice soft shake should actually do the trick, and you can discard the rest. And now remember, this is actually going to take a bit of time to cool off, and it is still a little hot, so I particularly like to do it by hand. It is a little easier to be able to form these balls really well and really get that beautiful consistency, especially once they start to cool off. So very easily, just start with the first piece you placed on your plate. It should actually be slightly cooler than the rest, and just begin to press that really firmly against the palm of your hands, making sure to squeeze out any air that would be in there, and finish by rolling that perfectly into a ball about the size of a golf ball, and proceed to do the same for the rest. Now for this particular recipe, you may actually want to improvise your own ways. You can actually also stuff your ugali balls. You could actually make a separate mixture and just try and push that, put a hole right through the ball right over the top, pour a bit of the mixture and just seal it, and it will actually also give it quite a bit of a wow factor. Okay, just to finish that off. And continue to look for the same consistency right through to the very end. Nice firm presses as you continue. Remember, very important to actually squeeze out that extra air that could be in there, because this will actually break up the balls once they hit the hot oil, and that's something you're not looking for. So nice finish to that. And as you can see, about a nice beautiful consistency there. And all we are going to do is allow that to rest for a few minutes and cool off. But while that continues, we'll proceed to set up the rest of our station just to finish those off. So very, very quickly, very important to actually have give your oil a bit of time to heat up. So I'm using regular vegetable oil. This is about 2 cups, so I'm actually going to be frying them on a very, very shallow pan. And this is just to make sure that we actually just color them and not actually really drench them in too much oil. So very important that when you're frying, remember, a pan will save you the extra effort and the extra cost. It will actually be a little easier to work with. Although if you do have a deep fryer for this particular process, that will work the same way. Right, so very quickly, proceed to turn your gas on and allow for your oil to heat up. And while that continues, we are going to come back to our fish. So I'm quickly just going to give that a quick mix. And the mixture does tend to be a little wet before you actually begin to before you actually begin to fry. And if you do notice any signs of that bit of moistness, always reserve a bit more breadcrumbs so that you can actually have enough to do so to the very end. So I'm just going to add about another teaspoon. So far we've actually been adding about 1/4 cup of breadcrumbs. So you may actually want to take note of that. But for this particular recipe, for about 500 grams of fish, about 1/2 cup of breadcrumbs will do. And those you can be able to find at your regular retail stores. Alright, so your fish balls are done. We're going to grab a plate once more. And very quickly we are going to proceed to portion those out. So just get some nice, beautiful, big spoonfuls of your fish. Remember not to make the balls too big. They may not cook right through to the center. So I would recommend about a serving that size for each ball. And then just proceed to first portion them out with your spoon. Making sure to look for almost exactly the same quantities right through. If you're looking for more profound and accurate finish, you can actually also use a scale, and you can actually weigh them each to the same amount of weight. So real quickly, we're going to do about 6 of those, and you can actually now add a little bit of the mixture to each one, making sure not to make some bigger than the other. And those should be perfect. Right, so we're just going to place the mixture on the side. And now we are going to proceed to roll those out into some balls, just the same thing we did with the ugali. So very simply, using the palm of your hands, begin by squeezing your fish ball, getting rid of any air that could be in there, and finish off by just rolling it back to shape, almost to the size of a very, very small golf ball. And do the same thing for the rest. Begin by first giving it a firm press, and then roll it to finish, and just do the same to the very end. Now, a particular good pointer with fish balls, if you are going to be serving this, very important to also always consider options like having a dip to go with it. You can also improvise by putting a bit of skewers to them, which I'll be able to show you a little bit later when we get to the plating. And some very, very good additions would be maybe a lemon wedge to the side. Always brings out the best flavor out of your fish. And if you can actually get a chance of finding some deal in your regular supermarkets or your regular retail stores, that is also another very much treasured ingredient for this recipe. Right, so your balls are now just about the same size. Once more, proceed to clean your hands. Alright, so now we're going to proceed to start to fry those, but before we do so, very, very importantly, we're also going to crumb those. So we're going to just drop those into that little bit of breadcrumb that we had left. So I'm just going to use just a little bit of that, and all I'm going to do is place each ball inside the bowl, and using your other hand, just work your bowl. You can also do this on the surface of the table if you're using a bigger bowl. And that should actually be able to give you a nice coating of your fish. And proceed to do the same for the rest. One particular secret about coating your meatballs, or any balls for that matter, in this way, it actually allows for you to be a little cleaner as you work. It also allows for you to get a more even consistency because you're not actually pressing the ingredients into, or rather pressing your ingredients against the surface of your bowls. Just to finish off the last two. Right, so our oil is now hot enough to proceed to fry everything. So we are going to start off by just grabbing the breadcrumbs, and you can actually just add a small pinch in there just to make sure the oil is sizzling. You can be able to probably see from the cameras that the oil has gotten quite hot and it's actually smoky. At this particular stage, you can actually relax for a little bit, allow your oil to cool off, and then proceed to fry. But before we get there, we're going to take a short commercial break and we're going to clear up our station. But when we do come back, we're going to go straight into the frying of all these dishes, and I'm going to show you the last and most important part, which is a beautiful finish to the dish. So do not touch that dial. We'll be right back. Hello ladies and gentlemen, once more and welcome back. We were taking a short break really briefly and we're now back to finish this beautiful appetizers I have before you today. But as I said before we took the break, we are going to just throw this into the oil, and our oil is now nice and hot. So we're going to start off with the ugali balls. One particular trick I will share as well with most of you is a lot of us also forget that you can actually contaminate your food without actually having the intention to. And it's actually why I'm actually going to be using two different frying pans for this particular reason, one for the fish and one for the ugali balls. But for this reason, I am going to start off with the ugali balls. This will color a little faster. So just proceed to add those to your pan. Of course, always make sure to not put too many pieces at once. So a nice beautiful pan should have at least 5 pieces in that size. If you have a deep fryer, it actually really works to your advantage, but because I'm frying small amounts at this particular stage, I'm actually going to be shallow frying them, which is actually also a quicker process and it's also cost effective. So now just to monitor the ugali balls, actually just spread them out in the pan. Always make sure to give a bit of space between each piece so that they can actually cook evenly and they can actually get the same amount of contact with the heat and the oil. So we're just going to keep those in there. We're just looking for a nice beautiful golden color to them. That should take about 6 to 7 minutes on about 180 degrees. But if you're using a deep fryer at 180 to 200 degrees, that should actually cook almost between 4 and 5 minutes. So just very briefly, begin to start turning them one at a time, beginning with the one that went in first. Always a little easier to work in a certain motion, either clockwise or anti-clockwise. I like to particularly pick the point closest to the handle and then work my way around in a clock motion. So now give them their first turn as I've done. Allow them to also seal on the other side. And that should actually allow for you to actually get a beautiful even color right through. And now also to mention a nice good serving suggestion for anything in relation to seafood or fish for this particular dish. A bit of soy sauce like the one I have on the bowl with some nice beautiful lemon wedges on the side really serves to be a very, very good accompaniment to it. For the ugali balls, which are more of a vegetarian kind of touch, you can be able to see I've used a bit of lettuce in the bowl. This was just to expound on the fact that you could actually just serve those as they are for any vegetarian whatsoever. And it actually really works out to be a very, very good appetizer on its own. You can also alternate a few different dips and sauces to accompany your dish, and that will actually leave to your own creativity at home. So another turn once more. Just going to allow those to continue cooking. And also one last and very, very important detail as well, when you are working with particular cuts such as fish or any kind of meat for that matter, you should actually always make sure to really take very precautious steps when working, especially with contamination. So one pointer I will share with you as well, try to not use the same chopping board, especially if you're going to be serving people who may have any allergies. Another thing as well, always make sure to try and separate your cooking oils. Use one separate batch of oils for any other frying, and anything that pertains meat, reserve that for its own purpose. And then another thing is, you can actually reuse your oil. I always recommend at the end of every cooking process, allow your oil to cool down, strain it, put it in a separate container, and it will actually be able to outlast its time. But particularly for oils which you're doing anything in relation to meat, I always prefer to actually fry once with it and actually chuck the oil, because remember, bacteria does continue to stay within the boundaries of your oil, and every time you cook another dish into that very same pot, it actually may just carry the bacteria right through. So a very, very important pointer, especially for people who are actually dealing with any diet that actually has a bit of an allergy reaction to it. Right, so one last turn, and as you'll be able to see at this stage, there's a nice beautiful color coming through the balls. We're just going to allow for a few seconds to color the other side as well, and then we're going to proceed to do the fish. You can actually be able to make the balls in advance. You can keep those in the fridge overnight and fry them for lunch the following day, or you can actually do them in the morning if you do have that extra time, and they will actually be as flavorful and as fresh right to the point you serve them to your guests. Right, so those are done. Nice, beautiful, even color right through. So very, very importantly, always have some kitchen towel or some serviettes to drain your ugali ball or your fish balls in after cooking. But very, very importantly, always make sure to take out one piece at a time. Give a bit of shake there to make sure you actually reduce the amount of oil you take out of your pan, and then move that straight onto your parchment paper or your napkins and allow for them to drain. Right, those are done. We'll give those a few seconds to drain, and while we do so, I'm just going to switch to a fresh batch of oil. And as I mentioned as well, always try not to use the same utensils for separate dishes. So I'm just going to also just grab a new fresh pair of tongs. And now we're just going to allow that to drain slightly in the bowl. You can actually move them around, making sure to drain them as fast as possible. And then now you can actually proceed to plate them. So we're going to be placing those right on the side there. And as I mentioned, ugali balls is actually a very good appetizer, especially for vegetarians. So do keep in mind that there are much more options than serving your guests just plain old salad or plain old-fashioned vegetables out there. Right, so just to get that last piece onto the plate, you can just discard that. Now also remember to just replace your parchment paper as well. Always handy to actually have about 2 sheets. They actually do quite a good job in draining your oil. Now up next we're going to start to add our fish balls. So I'm going to be using a slotted spoon for that. Remember, these are a little more delicate than the ugali balls. And just slide those off the side of your pan one at a time. And you should allow for that to cook anywhere between 4 and 6 minutes for each side before turning. And always also remember once more to spread them out in the pan. Don't cook too much at once. Sometimes you might not actually be able to get that beautiful consistency right through. And you can also pour just a bit of oil right over the balls gently. That should allow for you to coat the breadcrumbs corner, the breadcrumb section right over the top really well. And it also helps for you to stabilize your balls very, very well. So for these particular ones, we weighed them out to about 30 to 35 grams a piece. You can actually roll them even smaller. Also to remember, this is fish. Remember, it won't cook like chicken. It will actually cook a little faster. So very important to also make sure to keep an eye on your food while it's cooking. Don't leave your pan unattended. Right, so nice beautiful color coming through. We're going to give that the first turn. Nice beautiful aroma coming through with the cumin and the garlic powder. Just also always remember to regulate your temperature, of course, especially if you are going to be cooking through the gas method. But if you do have a deep fryer, as I mentioned, it will make your work a little easier. So we're just going to clear that. And we'll proceed to start checking the balls. As I mentioned, always continue to use a motion that you can always relate to. Start from one point of the pan and work your way around, and you should be able to get a perfectly good consistency to the very end. Just going to turn those once more. They've now been going for about 3 minutes. We're going to allow for an extra minute to continue, and for that I'm actually now going to proceed to turn down my gas completely. Remember, your pan does contain, the oil will continue to cook and it will continue to retain some of that beautiful heat. So a beautiful pointer for some of you home cooks out there, if you can actually just turn your gas a little earlier before you finish your cooking, just before you finished browning everything in the pan, it will actually allow you to pull your gas a little further. Right, so one last turn, making sure that all the color consistency is very constant right through. And just like we did with the ugali balls, proceed to remove one piece at a time, allowing to drain the excess oil, and move that straight onto your parchment paper. Nice beautiful colors you can be able to see from the cameras there. And that is the last and final preparation stage for your balls. Something I mentioned earlier as well, always work your balls around your bowl with the parchment paper. That will actually allow for you to drain the excess oil a little faster. And now you can proceed to plate as you did for the first. Setting those right on your plate as we've done. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is as easy as it is to make a very, very simple appetizer. I hope you've actually managed to learn something interesting in the show today, and you can actually be able to improvise on some of these. But just very importantly, as we always mention on the show, very important to make a visual impact with your dish. So I'm going to be using some pickled poppadoms. These you can actually find in your regular supermarkets. And I'm just going to just put a few of those right over the fish balls. And as you can see, color does really give the impression, and it does give a very, very good appetizing finish. So thank you once again for tuning in today. Thank you for those of you who are also tuning in from Facebook Live. We do appreciate your comments, your queries, and do keep sending in your questions or any comments pertaining the show. My name is Chef Andy. It's been a pleasure having you, and until the next time, have a lovely day.